It's an interview from the Needle Drop.
This September, the Canadian band Women will be releasing their second album, Public Strain. And this group, instead of toning down what made their self-titled album so strange, a plethora of different song styles and a lot of rough and ragged production, they've in some ways magnified what makes Women such an intriguing listening experience. In this interview, I talk with band member, guitarist, and singer Patrick Flegel about production, indulgent music, recording the new album, and working the graveyard shift.
This interview is not starting.
I know this interview is not starting. All right, I'm just going to tell you.
More like we can't. We got to push this as far as we can.
I know, Pat. I'm just going to tell you. I'm just going to come right off the bat and just sort of tell you what I kind of feel about the record a little bit, just to start the interview. To me, on first listen, this album, maybe a little bit more than the Women's self-titled album, came off much more eerie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair? I think so.
A lot more atmosphere on this thing. I mean, it sounded like before, maybe you guys recorded in a cave, but maybe this time around, it sounds like you guys have picked up your instruments and walked further down the cave and then started playing again.
Yeah, we just went, deeper into the cave, pretty much.
And what did you guys find deeper into the cave on this album?
Darkness, Anthony.
I mean, now that we're talking in symbolic terms here.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know, man. Can't explain it.
I've always thought women's songs. There's something about them, whether it's a melody or whether it's a hook or whether it's just the sound of the guitar in one particular track, that kind of grabs me as being just maybe very sweet or very accessible or maybe really instant. And maybe I'm kind of expecting a pop song to happen, but you guys, even on this new album, sort of seem to find a way to just kind of throw a wrench into the works and just keep it from happening. Which, to me, is maybe made this album a little bit more of a grower for me. I've been listening to it nonstop, on and off. I mean, I know that doesn't make any sense, but when it is in the CD player, it gets about 3 or 4 spins through before I have to put something else in. And I kind of find myself maybe not so much just sitting back and not really just sort of vegging out as the record plays, but kind of just leaning in and thinking about it, like, oh, here's a drone, here's a really strange guitar chord I haven't heard before, and here is a time signature in 13.
I'm trying to explain.
That you should, because this is your time to shine.
Right. I think it's just what we do. I think we personally, I like listening to something. I've noticed some music that's really simple or is really consistent. I just like to listen to a record and just get lost in like the production or whatever, where things are changing all the time and you're just being surprised almost, as it goes along. As opposed to hearing, just the same song 12 times in a row. That's something I appreciate about like a lot of my favorite bands. There's a lot of variation, and like you were saying, whether it's, I don't know, I like people not always doing what they're capable of on their instruments. Like, that's something that bugs me about metal, is that it's in a lot of situations it's more of a sport,
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, okay, how fast can we do this?
Yeah.
And how loud. But I've always liked when people could play their instruments, but they did it with style, or there'll be like flourishes, you know what I'm saying, where it's, there's a lot of restraint, and then once in a while something will happen, just be like, where did that come from? It engages you, and it kind of brings you in, and just adds some substance to it, I guess. And I'm glad you appreciate, I guess you were talking about just the tone of things, like even if it's simple, just the way something's recorded might appeal to you or someone. But I notice things like that too. Like I listen to music with headphones, and I really get off on that kind of thing, like subliminal, like, okay, this synthesizer is in the mix, but it's barely in the mix. I can't even really hear it because it's panned in the exact same spot as the guitar. And it's one note off. Fantastic.
Well, there's all sorts of instances on this album, as you know, where you'll hear just a really faint guitar strumming maybe in the background, and it'll sound like, I don't know, maybe something rattling against a car door, just have a really strange metallic grinding kind of sound to it. And yeah, you're right. Simple production flourishes can add loads to a track. I mean, how many songs have made use of maybe like a single tambourine hit with just an ocean of reverb on it, and it just like casts out for the entire bar, that it's hit on, and yet it just adds so much texture to it that otherwise just wouldn't have been there.
Yeah, we enjoy that kind of thing. I think you got to take the lead here, Anthony.
You think I got to take the lead here? Well, as long as we're talking production,
yeah.
In any way that you possibly could, and I'm just going to leave this, this could be a double-edged sword here. This is a very open-ended question, and it could lead to a lot of information, or it could lead to you not knowing where to start. But in terms of the production, just feel free to react to this however you want. It just sounds like a really rough, really, at times, abrasive sound, but I wouldn't say it's lo-fi. I mean, there's tons of fidelity there. There's hard-hitting drums. There's bass in there. I mean, there is a long range of sound. However, there is just that dirtiness, like that filthiness to it. It sounds, as we were talking about earlier, we were talking about that cave. It sounds dank. It sounds really damp and just cacophonous because of just all of the bouncing reverb. It sounds a little bit bigger than it is, but even if it didn't have all the reverb on it, it would still sound really rough and wild.
Yeah, I think that just might be a result of, we're trying to make it sound good, but the gear we're using, most of the time it's going to tape. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know, we just try and choose, get sounds before we play. I mean, it's weird because some songs like that Penal Colony song, for example, I knew how I wanted the guitar to sound, so I wanted this like no tone kind of thing on the neck pickup, and we weren't actually planning on using that take for the recording, but when we finished playing it, we just thought we'd keep it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot, as much as, I don't know, it's sort of that controlled. Actually, I don't want to use that term, but like intentionally doing things on the fly sometimes. Where it's just kind of rough, but at the same time, there are other parts where we're very meticulous.
That was another thing I'd written down and really kind of captivated me about this record. So much of it does sound really in the moment. It does sound from beginning to end like you guys are performing this in real time.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I feel like, I really don't like canned recordings where it doesn't sound real, Mm. So I think that's part of it. You get really intoxicated or whatever, and you just don't stress out as much. And just kind of let it happen. Talked about, the way it sounds. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was to tape, most of it. So, just the way things are breaking up. I mean, it's not in the red, it's not like shredding your ears or anything like that. It's not all tape hiss.
Yeah.
But it is, it was recorded to tape, so I think that's the reason it sounds kind of raw, And I don't think we'd feel comfortable recording in a studio just because we're so disorganized, and it would just be a nightmare.
I mean, I could totally relate and understand, just the constraints being on, sort of the time that your dollar amount will let you have. But, you were sort of talking about, maybe in a respect this album is a little bit limited by the fact that you guys don't have pro gear in your possession. Is that something you would seek out if you in fact had the cash? Or, I mean, are you pretty much content with this sound? I mean, though there are limitations. Go ahead.
I think we're just shooting for sounds that we like listening to other records, and those are, speaking for myself, it's mostly records that were recorded, in the late 70s, which was actually using, everyone had to use a studio for the most part.
Yeah.
And recordings in the 60s, but I feel like they're really rough. I mean, even if you listen to like Beatles records, it's actually pretty rough. Like everything's clipping. It's usually like panned fiercely so they could track as much as they wanted, because I think they were only using 4-track half the time.
Yeah.
It's really raw. You know what I mean? And I like that. It's just the sound of tape breaking up and the way it compresses things.
Well, not only
So yeah, I think it's there's something very intentional about that sound.
But not only that, it really also goes back to the fact that you guys are or did record this in a very kind of live setting. That music of that time wasn't all too canned either. Even the Beatles' more arranged stuff had to be done in takes, as opposed to that one single riff at 3 minutes and 24 seconds is a little off. Just re-record it or copy it and paste it, and then just throw it in there. Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing about this record, it kind of put me on the fence for just a little bit. I kind of had to think about this. You just mentioned canned music. I appreciate a lot of music like that if the person who's writing the song can really sort of pull out their arranging chops and just create something that doesn't sound really repetitive, but is still engaging. Sort of what I'm getting at is this LP sounds so visceral, sounds so instant, just sounds so in the moment, but is just so highly experimental, which I usually don't associate with experimental music. Usually for me, music that is either very noisy or takes a lot of twists and a lot of turns and sort of throws in some left hooks here and there, is really more of a grower for me, as opposed
research music.
What is it?
Research music.
A little bit, but this album, even number 6, China Steps.
Yeah.
Even though that track does have its experimental elements to it, starts off with a really heavy drum beat, gets really loud, just gets really, is really in the spirit of any type of loud, sweaty, crazy music, but still has these elements that you can sort of dive into and say, oh wow, that's really kind of something somebody would do if they were really looking to kind of mind fuck you.
I definitely don't think we're trying to do anything confrontational. I don't find what we do very shocking, actually, so I'm kind of surprised when people think that it's particularly grating or dissonant or whatever. But
I don't think it's not that it's grating or more grating. I mean, of course there's more grating music, more abrasive music. I think what it is that when people hear, like let's say for instance the track that got released from this album, put out onto the internet, Eyesore, and the track that got released from the previous album, what was it? It was Black Rice, correct?
Yeah.
Those two tracks share pretty much the common ground that they are each, to me anyway, the catchiest songs on their respective albums. And on this LP, there are a lot of sweet and accessible sounds on here, but then, like I said, it's each track kind of takes its own little turn, whether it is an odd time signature or whether it is just an odd sound. Not that the album itself is the most abrasive thing, but you're bringing these sweet sounds so close to these abrasive sounds, and people just aren't expecting one or the other, and because of that, maybe the loudness or the abrasiveness of the album seems sort of magnified, or maybe the sweetness of the album to somebody who's really into experimental music seems sort of magnified. Because when you bring these two differences together, what makes them different becomes so much more apparent.
Absolutely. I like that kind of variation. I like the context that the pop songs are in when you're talking about the sort of darker, more dissonant songs. I like that. I just like the tension,
Yeah. That's another word that I didn't think of that I would use to describe a lot of tracks on this album. There is a ton of tension. And I think that's really what kind of makes me sit on the edge of my seat, even after listening to a track multiple times. There's just that tension there that you really can't boil down to, oh, this is a guitar chord and I'm strumming it. It's so many more things than that. It's really something that you have to kind of forge out of a recording of people playing this live and playing this in the moment and together with a certain kind of production style in a certain place with a certain idea in mind.
I mean, it's really hard to listen to your own music and sort of say how other people will hear it, but I don't feel like it's a party album.
No.
You know?
No, I wouldn't. I mean,
Yeah.
tell me what you think fans of your previous album should come to expect from this one.
Well, that's something I appreciated about what we did with the first one is it left us a lot of room to do whatever we wanted.
It did.
Which is pretty much the objective of the band, is to just do whatever we want and not be concerned with what anyone says that has nothing to do with the creative process. I feel like there's less variation. Like we kind of have a bet. I feel like what we intended to do, even though we completely missed the mark, is it's still closer to like our intention, like the way it actually sounds. Whereas the first one, I feel like things we missed the mark even a lot more. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
a lot further away from this idea we had. Which is fun. I enjoy that. But yeah, I feel like this one, I feel like we were taking the same risks, or like in our own mind, where I'm like, oh man, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't know if this is gonna work, or if I'm gonna like this, or if I would listen to this. But I feel like I'm more at peace with this one. So I guess you could say it's more accurate.
I mean, I totally know what you're saying. I mean, just because you missed the target doesn't mean it wasn't a bullseye somewhere else.
Well, that's the fun part.
Yeah.
Like that's what I love about it, is having an idea, recording it, and hearing something else.
Yeah, and then your mind kind of wanders off into another spot. When I did listen to the first album, I mean, I think maybe my first impression was that of a lot of people. Yeah, this record is really all over the place. It does go into a lot of spots, but the production and the sound is really consistent. It sort of seems like these guys know what they're doing, and maybe on the next go around they're going to maybe refine their sound a little bit and do something a little with a little less variation, something that maybe harks on the more popular songs of this last album. But I do understand what you're saying. There is maybe a little less variation on this album, but I was surprised and sort of in retrospect pleased by the fact that Women has kind of remained something that is explorative and something that you don't necessarily know what to expect from.
Yeah, I don't know. I appreciate that, because I feel like, when I'm listening to a record, I just want it to be, exciting, or just not really know exactly what I'm going to get, from song to song. So if we're managing to do that, I think that's fucking great.
Were there really any constraints on you guys for this new album? I mean, were you thinking in your heads, oh, we did that the last album, we can't do this, or we tried to do that last album but didn't succeed, we really need to try again? Pretty
much as soon as I like settle with the recording, I'm already thinking about new songs. I think we're way harder on it than anyone else could be. Me in particular, like to the point where I think I just want it to be good, and like I said, something that I would listen to, and it's really hard to do that, and especially when you can't listen to your own music objectively, or whatever, but or any music. But I just think just trying to please ourselves from the start, and I've started to notice that the bands that I really relate to or that I really appreciate are people who are extremely self-indulgent. Glenn Branca would be a good example of that, or Harry Pussy, or or even just Roy Orbison. You know what I mean? He's just sulking. I just enjoy hearing someone like a lack of restraint. As far as the style is concerned, or just I like listening to music that sounds sort of fearless, or like they're not afraid of fucking up, or not particularly worried about what people think, or some music's just confrontational for the sake of confrontation, and it just kind of bad, But like a band like U.S. Maple, like this album Talker that I really enjoyed, I just feel like it's so unique, and it's one of those things that you might be rehearsing, and then I feel like a lot of people would tone it down or do something because they felt like it was just too ridiculous to pull off or to record and take seriously. You know what I'm saying? All right, Patrick. This is all the time we have left in this interview, dude. Thanks for your time. I can't seem to form complete sentences right now or say anything insightful, but hopefully you can call something out of that. It's a work of art.
It's an abstract, indulgent, experimental piece of art. Well, this would have been the end of the interview, but for some reason, after I sort of said goodbye and saw Patrick off, he started to talk a little bit more about the recording process of the album and the graveyard shift where he was working at the time, which he acknowledges contributed a lot to his emotions during the songwriting process and the overall ambiance of the album, too. So I figured, hey, just keep the tape rolling if he's going to keep talking about the music.
The fact that my schedule was completely sideways the entire time we were recording. I was working at the graveyard shift full time. Mm-hmm. And so it was a period of just like severe isolation. So like not really hanging out with anyone, not really talking to anyone, just going to work, coming home, sleeping all day till I had to work again. And then if we were recording, someone would drag me out of bed. So I feel like, and it was in a sort of a strange environment where it was the overnight shift at like a group home.
Yeah.
It's a small little community in the suburbs of Calgary of group homes. So there are about 14, 15 buildings, including a school. Each building serves a different purpose for different adolescent young people, anyone who's under 18. So the people I was working with and just the experience in general, that's what contextualizes the album in my mind, is this bizarre complex in the suburbs. Yeah, no people around, just completely quiet, just left alone to your thoughts, too much time on your hands, thinking too much, blowing things out of proportion, growing like incredibly paranoid. Yeah, so in my mind, that's what the album feels like. Even though I've talked to some people, I'm like, man, I feel like no one's going to want to listen to this because it's so depressing. But in reality, I think that's just where I was at in the music. It's kind of, like I said, I don't know if it really informed it. If anything, it was almost a detriment to the recording process. But
you just saying that made me want to ask about that. Ask about the recording process. I mean, did this graveyard shift, having to being, woken up to record a song, did that lead to a lot of recording sessions where maybe you only had, so little time on your hands to actually put a song together? I mean, were a lot of these songs, as a result of that, rushed or put through a situation where you were recording them or performing them and you were dead tired and maybe ran into some mistakes as a result of that?
No, I mean, we had plenty of time. I think we took like 8 months on it. It's on and off. So, if we track things that we had prepared, or we'd go in just with a production idea, like China Steps is a song where we started with nothing really. We were just had this bass line. We knew that we wanted to have like just manipulate the drum sound. So like, I don't know, near the end of the song, it's like a huge room mic in this. We recorded the drums in this cavernous concrete basement in Chad's garage. And then at the end of the song, it switches to just like really dry, tight, close mic'd drum sound.
Yeah.
And like that's a good example of something we just did on the fly, and it was more like the recording was we were writing the song as we did it. But I think it was more just attributed to me, like being kind of out of it, very detached from the whole thing. Like I feel like I wasn't even there.
And is the this whole night shift and this this suburban area you were talking about, I mean, does this all relate back to the album title?
Well, it's weird because it's sort of the opposite of what I mean. It sort of sounds like a very dramatic name, and I think it could be easily misconstrued or like turned into some huge idea. But I still don't really know what to tell people. I don't like spelling things. There are like people spelling things out for me either, like when I'm listening to their music. But
yeah,
I think it's weird because it's actually the opposite of that. It's just being completely isolated from everything else.
And that was the end of our interview with Patrick Flegel of the band Women Remember Women's new LP is Public Strain, and it's due for a September 28th release in America on Jaguar. You can download a track from the new album Eyesore at our website, theneedledrop.com. Anthony Fantano here, and thanks for listening.